Hello there, brave souls and curious minds. Before we dive into tonight's story, I want you to get comfortable. Maybe dim the lights a little. Grab something warm to drink. What I'm about to share with you isn't just any tale. It's a chilling, true account that's been carefully researched and pieced together from journals, local records, and the whispered recollections of those who lived through these events. Are you ready to journey with me to a place where reality becomes more terrifying than fiction? I promise what you're about to hear will stay with you long after this video ends. The Pemaquid Point Lighthouse has stood sentinel over the jagged Maine coastline since 1827, its beam cutting through the densest fog and darkest nights, warning sailors of the treacherous rocks below. But for all its years of faithful service, few people know the dark history that haunts its whitewashed walls. I didn't either until a frigid November afternoon in 2018, when a dusty box of forgotten archives changed everything I thought I knew about this seemingly picturesque landmark. My name is Eleanor Webb, a maritime historian specializing in New England coastal structures. What began as routine research for my doctoral thesis evolved into an obsession that would consume 3 years of my life and lead me to question the very nature of reality itself. I share this account now, not for academic recognition, but as a warning. The first unusual document I encountered was a letter dated March 12, 1873, from the Lighthouse Board to the Secretary of the Treasury, requesting the immediate reassignment of Keeper Thomas Chamberlain. The language was bureaucratic but unusually urgent. The current keeper has demonstrated behaviors inconsistent with his duties and of concern to this board. Replacement is advised with utmost haste. What struck me as odd was that Thomas Chamberlain had been one of the most decorated keepers in Maine's history. His record showed 15 years of impeccable service, with commendations for rescuing shipwreck survivors during the infamous winter storm of 1869. Why would such a respected keeper suddenly require removal? The trail might have gone cold there if not for a chance conversation with Margaret Phelps, the 92-year-old granddaughter of William Phelps, the lighthouse keeper who replaced Chamberlain. Margaret still lived in Bristol, just a few miles from Pemaquid Point. When I mentioned my research, her demeanor changed instantly. My grandfather never spoke of his early days at the lighthouse, she told me, her eyes suddenly distant. Only once, when I was about 7, did I overhear him telling my grandmother that what Chamberlain found beneath the rocks should have stayed there. When he realized I was listening, he went silent for days afterward. Margaret agreed to let me see her grandfather's personal effects, stored in her attic for decades. Among them was a small leather journal, its pages brittle with age. Inside, William Phelps had meticulously documented not just weather conditions and ship sightings, but something far more disturbing. The first unusual entry appeared just 2 weeks after he took the position. April 3rd, 1873, clear skies, wind from NE at 10 knots, tides normal. 3 vessels sighted. The scratching has begun again. It comes from beneath the keeper's quarters, most active at midnight. Chamberlain mentioned it in his hasty departure notes, but I dismissed it as the ramblings of a troubled mind. I was wrong. The entries continued normally for several weeks, with only occasional references to the strange sounds. Then, on May 18th, the scratching grew violent last night. My wife insists it is merely rats in the foundation, but no rodent makes such deliberate patterns. It sounds almost like communication. I have begun to record the patterns. They repeat in sequences of 3 long scrapes, followed by 2 short ones. I cross-referenced this with shipping records and weather reports from the period. There were no significant maritime events that might explain Phelps' growing paranoia. What's more, the lighthouse had been built on solid bedrock, hardly a hospitable environment for a rat infestation. The journal entries grew increasingly disturbing through the summer months. June 27, 1873. I found strange markings on the rocks below the lighthouse today. They appear to be very old, possibly predating the lighthouse itself. The patterns mirror the scratching sequences I've been hearing. Elizabeth thinks I'm working too hard. Perhaps she's right. July 14th, 1873. Elizabeth and I argue today. She threatens to return to her sister's home in Portland if I continue this foolish obsession. But she doesn't understand. The scratching responds to my movements. When I walk across certain boards in the keeper's quarters, it intensifies. It knows I'm here. The entries continued in this altered style for several more pages, describing increasingly disturbing visions and revelations. Phelps wrote of ancient entities that existed between the fabric of reality, and how the particular configuration of the rocks at Pemaquid Point created a finning that allowed these beings to occasionally reach through. Most disturbing was his claim that Thomas Chamberlain hadn't been removed from his position at all. According to Phelps' journal, Chamberlain had discovered the same cavity beneath the floorboards, descended into it, and never returned, at least not as himself. What emerged wearing Chamberlain's face was something else entirely. The lighthouse board didn't reassign him. They eliminated him after several residents reported his unnatural behavior. They know about the door beneath, have always known, but they merely contain rather than destroy, for they fear what might be released in the attempt. I was skeptical, of course. The journal could easily be the product of isolation and the psychological strain common among lighthouse keepers of that era. Lighthouse madness was well documented in maritime literature, the result of solitude, sleep deprivation, and the constant rhythmic pounding of waves. But my academic skepticism began to waver when I discovered additional collaborating evidence. The first came from local church records. The Bristol Congregational Church had documented a strange incident in the summer of 1873 when William Phelps had disrupted Sunday service, shouting incomprehensibly about those who wait below before being forcibly removed. The church elders had called for a doctor who diagnosed Phelps with nervous exhaustion, a common catch-all diagnosis of the period. More compelling was what I found in the restricted archives of the U.S. Lighthouse Board. After considerable bureaucratic wrangling, I gained access to their sealed records from 1870 to 1875. Among them was a confidential report about Pemaquid Point, marked for the eyes of the Secretary of the Treasury only. It contained a disturbing account from a lighthouse inspector who had visited the site in September 1873. Upon arrival at Pemaquid Point, Keeper Phelps appeared severely malnourished and disoriented. He insisted on speaking in what he claimed was the true language of the depths, an unintelligible series of clicks and guttural sounds. Most concerning was the condition of the keeper's quarters, where Phelps had removed most of the floorboards to expose a peculiar formation in the bedrock below. This formation appears to be a shaft of unknown depth, approximately 3 feet in diameter. Despite having no logical geological explanation for its presence, our team geologist Dr. Harrison, confirmed it could not have been man-made, given the hardness of the surrounding granite. Most disturbing was the discovery of numerous dead seabirds arranged in concentric circles around this opening. Keeper Phelps became violent when we attempted to cover the shaft, necessitating his restraint and immediate removal from the premises. I recommend immediate sealing of the formation with concrete and reassignment of a new keeper unfamiliar with these events. The local physician has agreed to commit Phelps to the state asylum under the diagnosis of acute melancholia, ensuring this incident remains contained. The report concluded with a handwritten note from the Lighthouse Board commissioner himself. This represents the third such incident at Pemaquid since its construction. Consider permanent closure and relocation of the light. Yet the lighthouse remained operational, and the incident was buried in classified files until I unearthed it, nearly 150 years later. My research might have remained safely academic if not for what happened during my final visit to Pemaquid Point in January 2021. Winter is a desolate time at Maine lighthouses. Few tourists brave the bitter cold and howling winds that sweep across the exposed peninsulas. I had arranged special access to measure and photograph the keeper's quarters for my thesis, working with the Historical Preservation Society that now maintained the structure. The elderly caretaker who admitted me seemed nervous, repeatedly asking when I would finish and checking his pocket watch. Best to be gone before sunset, he advised, though he wouldn't elaborate why. He left me alone with my measuring tape and camera, promising to return in 2 hours. The keeper's quarters had been converted into a small museum with period furniture and educational placards about lighthouse operation. The original floorboards remained, though they'd been reinforced and restored over the decades. As I measured the dimensions of the main room, I noticed something peculiar, a section of flooring that resonated differently when walked upon, creating a subtle hollow sound rather than the solid thunk of boards on stone. Curiosity overcame professional detachment. I examined the edges of the boards and found they had been cut and reinstalled, the work skillfully disguised but detectable to a careful eye. Using a multi-tool from my research kit, I managed to pry up one board slightly, revealing modern concrete beneath rather than the original bedrock foundation. And then I heard it. Faint but unmistakable, a scratching sound, rhythmic and deliberate. 3 long scrapes, followed by 2 short ones, exactly as William Phelps had described in his journal 148 years earlier. I convinced myself it was merely water pipes or the natural settling of the old structure. Yet as the winter daylight began to fade, the scratching intensified. Against all rational judgment, I continued to loosen the floorboard, driven by an academic curiosity that overpowered my growing unease. What I found beneath remains difficult to describe in scientific terms. The concrete had cracked in a perfect circle, matching the diameter of the shaft described in the 1873 report. More disturbing were the markings etched into the concrete, symbols that matched drawings in Phelps's journal, intricate patterns that seemed to shift slightly when viewed peripherally. As darkness fell, the temperature in the room plummeted. My breath clouded before me, despite the building's heating system. The scratching became a persistent rhythm, no longer coming from below, but seemingly from all directions simultaneously. And then I noticed something that sent ice through my veins. Small piles of dead seabirds had appeared outside each window of the keeper's quarters, arranged in the same concentric circles described in the inspector's report. I wish I could say I faced this mystery with scientific courage, that I documented everything methodically before departing. The truth is far less heroic. I fled, leaving my equipment behind, running to my rental car with the scratching sounds seemingly pursuing me across the parking lot. As I drove away, my rear-view mirror showed the lighthouse beacon glowing with an unnatural bluish tint, different from the standard illumination used in modern automated lighthouses. What happened in the days that followed confirms that I encountered something beyond conventional explanation. My digital photos from inside the keeper's quarters showed strange distortions, shadowy figures standing in corners where I'd seen nothing with my naked eye. Audio recordings captured not just the scratching, but faint voices speaking in what linguistics experts at my university identified as a mixture of colonial-era English and something structurally unlike any known human language. Most convincing was the physical evidence. When I emptied my backpack the following day, I discovered a small stone that I had no recollection of collecting, roughly the size of a golf ball. It was unlike the granite common to Pemaquid Point. Instead, it was an iridescent black material that geological analysis later found to contain elements inconsistent with Earth's mineral composition. More disturbing still, the stone maintained a temperature precisely 10 degrees below its surroundings, regardless of environmental conditions. I've spent the past year attempting to construct a rational explanation for these events, to fit them into our understanding of natural phenomena. The most obvious conclusion that I experienced some form of suggestion-induced hallucination based on my immersion in Phelps's writings falls apart when confronted with the physical evidence and independent verification of my recordings. The truth appears to be what folklore has hinted at for centuries, that certain locations serve as intersections between our reality and something else. The indigenous Abenaki people called Pemaquid Point the place of the standing stone and considered it taboo. Early colonial records describe inexplicable disappearances and strange melancholies affecting settlers who lived too close to the point. The lighthouse wasn't merely built to warn ships. It was constructed to monitor something far older, its constant human presence and illumination, serving as both guard and ward. 3 weeks ago, I received an unmarked package containing a single page torn from what appeared to be William Phelps' journal, a page not included in the volume I'd discovered in Margaret's attic. The handwriting matched the later entries after his style had changed. They are patient beyond human comprehension. They have waited millennia and will wait millennia more. But occasionally, they find someone receptive, someone curious enough to listen for the scratching, someone who will loosen the boards and peer into the dark. They found Chamberlain. They found me. And now, my dear reader, I fear they have found you. The return address was listed simply as Pemaquid Point Lighthouse, Keeper's Quarters, despite the building having no residential keeper for over 50 years. Most disturbing of all, when I returned to Margaret Phelps' home to discuss this development, I discovered she had passed away 3 months earlier. According to her son, all of her possessions, including her grandfather's journal, had been donated to a maritime museum in Portland. 8 weeks before I received the mysterious page, I've arranged for this account and all my evidence to be published in the event of my disappearance or death. I've heard the scratching in my apartment now for 3 consecutive nights, 3 long scrapes, followed by 2 short ones. The stone from my backpack has disappeared. In its place was a small pile of seabird feathers arranged in a perfect circle. Tonight, I'm driving back to Pemaquid Point. Not because I want to, but because I must. The compulsion is irresistible now. I understand what happened to Chamberlain and to Phelps, the curiosity becomes hunger, and the hunger becomes need. Something waits beneath the lighthouse, something that has waited longer than human civilization has existed, and it's patient enough to call its chosen ones back, one by one, across decades and centuries. If you ever find yourself at Pemaquid Point, admiring the picturesque lighthouse against the rocky Maine coast, listen carefully. If you hear scratching, 3 long scrapes, followed by 2 short ones, walk away immediately. Do not investigate. Do not attempt to document or understand it. Some doors are meant to remain closed. Some secrets are meant to stay buried beneath stone and sea and time itself. But I fear it's too late for me. I've heard the true language of the depths now, and it speaks my name. If you've made it to the end of this chilling true story, I want to thank you for joining me on this dark journey. What do you think happened to Eleanor Webb? Did she ever return from Pemaquid Point that night? And more importantly, have you ever experienced something that defied explanation at a historic site or secluded location? The line between reality and the unknown is thinner than we think. If this tale kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories that explore the mysterious and unexplained. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss my next upload. Until next time, sleep well, if you can.